Hi guys, it's Ms. Flates again. We're here with our next PowerPoint. We're going to be talking about appeasement. So our last lecture, we talked about the rise of dictators. And now we're getting to the point where we're going to talk about how did the war actually start. So you should have your guided notes out on your Google Docs. And the first thing I want you to do to warm up is analyze this political cartoon. Okay, it has a picture of two men. There's a person standing in front of it. It says, "What have you done today to help save your country from them?" So who's the artist of this cartoon? This is going to be interesting because we're going to be looking at a couple different political cartoons today, but they're all by the same artist. Hint, look at the bottom left-hand corner. You'd be surprised that this artist would have a lot of war political cartoons, right? Number two, the leaders of what two countries are depicted in this drawing. And then three, what is the cartoon attempting to get people to do? So go ahead and take a minute and answer these three questions. Pause the video if you need to, but I'm gonna move on. All right, appeasement and the start of World War II. All right, so the Treaty of Versailles regulations. Now, we've been talking about the Treaty of Versailles since last chapter. We know this was one of the documents that helped end World War I. We've talked about the regulations, but let's just bring them up one more time so we really get a good feeling about where Germany is at and how they're feeling after World War I. Germany had to accept the blame for World War I. I talked about that in the last slide. They're forced to pay over $30 billion in reparations. So we talked about payments that they had to make and why they were in so much debt, but the actual number is $30 billion. Germany lost territory, really the Polish corridor of the land that they owned. Think about when we talked about the Franks, the Holy Roman Empire, just that whole Western going into Eastern Europe, that was all unification of Germany, unification of Italy when we did that chapter. The territory has always been changing, but now Germany really lost a lot as a punishment pretty much. The Rhineland was demilitarized, meaning that Germany was not allowed to have a big army. They could only have a certain amount of people in their army, and this is really important for what we're going to talk about later. So Germany's armed forces was limited to only having 100,000 men in their army. They could not have any more than 100,000 men. That is nothing. In battles, hundreds of thousands of men would die, okay? But again, Europe didn't want what happened in the Great War to happen again. So they said, well, what's the one thing that we can do? We can limit their army to only being allowed to have this many people. They're also not allowed to have any submarines or airplanes. So really limiting everything that they can so that Germany won't come back and start another war. You would think that they took all the precautions, but Hitler has that manipulative way about him that he got past a lot of it. Okay, so on your guided notes, I have what is the definition of appeasement, okay? And I like to use this little scenario for what appeasement really means. So a lot of you, say you have a little sister, a little brother, or a cousin, or even you're just in a grocery store and you see a little kid having a temper tantrum. They're screaming and crying because they want a candy bar and their mom says, no, you're not allowed to have the candy bar. And they throw a big fit. They're screaming in the aisles. They're crying. They won't shut up. Most people would think, okay, the parent should just take them out of the grocery store, not say anything, not do anything, take care of it at home. But what do a lot of parents do? To get their child to shut up, they just give them the candy bar that they wanted because they can't take them screaming and crying. So the child wanted the candy bar, they were screaming and crying, they would not shut up, the parent just gives them the candy bar to shut them up. The parent is appeasing the child, okay? This is really exactly what happened in World War II, where Hitler was screaming and crying and saying, I don't want to pay reparations. I don't want to have so little land. I want to own more land. I don't want to have a small military. I want to have a big military. And Hitler's screaming and crying. And what does the rest of Europe do? All these leaders, instead of saying, no, what's written in the Treaty of Versailles is permanent and this is what's going to happen, they appease Hitler. They give him the candy bar. They allow him to break things in the Treaty of Versailles because they're so afraid of having another war start. You have to realize that World War I, it wasn't World War I, it was the Great War, and people were really traumatized by the amount of deaths, the type of fighting, the trench warfare, the gas, the no man's lands. It was something that has never been done before, the war to end all wars, right? They would do anything to make sure that another war would never happen again. The people can't handle it. Even if that means giving Hitler that candy bar, even if that means breaking things in the Treaty of Versailles and giving Hitler what he wants to appease him so that he doesn't start another war. So Europe thought this was a good idea to give Hitler that candy bar, and it lasted for so long, but if you keep giving a kid a candy bar every time they have a temper tantrum, then they know, well, if I just cry, I'm going to get what I want. And that's basically what happens with Hitler. Okay, so we're in 1933. Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. We talked about that in our last PowerPoint. And he wants Lebensraum, I hope I'm saying that right. Basically what that means in German is he wants more living space around his country, meaning he wants more territory, right? Since our very first chapter, the Byzantine Empire, more lands, more power, that's what it means to be a great ruler. And it's also that temptingness of, oh, I'm not allowed to have any lands because of the Treaty of Versailles. Now I really want more lands. And he wants to become more powerful, right? So this idea of having more living space around his country, well, if he does that, he's going to have to break the Treaty of Versailles. This is him discussing some plans to get that living space that he wants for Germany, because Germany is the best country, because he's a nationalist and a fascist, right? So 1935, Hitler announces the expansion of the German army. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but that's just another word for the German army. So he expands the German army to 600,000 members. That's 6 times the amount that they're permitted by the Treaty of Versailles. From the past slide, it said that Germany is only allowed to have 100,000 members in their army. But Hitler says, screw that. I told the German people that I'm going to restore German glory and I want to expand my land, so I need a bigger army and I don't care what they say. So all these leaders in Europe, in England and France, everybody's just listening and they see what Hitler's doing, but they're not doing anything about it. They're just like, all right, you know, let's keep it calm, let's wait it out. We are so traumatized by World War I really don't want to start it again. So this is the first time that Hitler really breaks one of the main things in the Treaty of Versailles. Here's his army that he created. 1936, Hitler claims Germany feels threatened and sends forces to occupy the Rhineland. So he's going against the Treaty of Versailles in 2 ways, right? 1, he formed a larger army than he's allowed to. And then 2, he started expanding his land that was taken away from him that he's not allowed to have. So basically this whole treaty that was written up to basically punish Germany and end World War I is resurfacing again. And everyone in Europe is really getting shooken up, so worried that another war is going to start. What do we do to stop this? And here's just a picture of Nazi Germany. Obviously flags all over the place. They didn't really have a choice if they wanted to support Hitler or not, but you have to remember they're being manipulated to Hitler made us an Europe made us an embarrassment and blamed us for World War I, and Hitler is going to make us proud and strong again, right? 1938, Hitler wants an Anschluss. Anschluss, or a union with Austria. So basically he's annexing Austria, adding them to the German Empire, which is what he's creating, right? Okay, also against the Treaty of Versailles. He wanted to add or annex Austria to Germany because he is Austrian. He was born in Austria. And also he said that Austria is from the same German ethnic group, right? And we know this when we go back to the Middle Ages and we talk about those Germanic tribes, the Franks, the Anglos, the Saxons, Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Empire. He is right with that, where Germany and Austria ethnically, if they were to do a DNA test, are really going to be exactly the same. And he thought that pure Aryan race in Germany was the same in Austria, so it should be part of the greater Germany. People celebrating, Germany getting more powerful. The German people are starting to feel uplifted and they don't feel so embarrassed by themselves. Okay, also in 1938, Hitler next claims that his last territorial demand is the Sudetenland. So Sudetenland is part of Czechoslovakia, and it's 3 million ethnic Germans live there. So he says that he wants to annex this land because his main goal was, first he grew his military, and then he gained all this land to expand his empire. More land, more power, right? He got Austria because they're technically ethnic Germans also, if you look at their DNA. Now he wants this part of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, because there are a lot of ethnic Germans that lived there, if you look at the Holy Roman Empire, where the Franks were, all that stuff. Now, interesting thing, he justified it by saying that's where a lot of ethnic Germans lived, but really it's where 66% of Czechoslovakia's coal was, 70% of its iron and steel, 70% of its electrical power. So if Hitler owns the part of Czechoslovakia where they have most of their economic income, then his country is going to do a lot better and he gets to reap the benefit of those resources, right? Czechoslovakia nation, now that most of their resources are part of the greater Germany, Nazi Germany that Hitler is creating, now they're vulnerable to have complete German domination. And Hitler is slowly adding more and more and more to his Nazi Germany that he's creating, right? Again, world leaders in Europe are sitting back. What do? Okay, first he expanded his military. Then he takes Austria. Now he's taking part of Czechoslovakia. We can't just sit around anymore. This is getting to be too much. So what will these leaders choose to do about Adolf Hitler's actions? Don't you just love his outfit right there? His high socks. Like, what the? Okay, so we have our two world leaders right here. We have Neville Chamberlain at the top, and we should know who that is, FDR at the bottom. Let's see what they decide to do. They decide to hold a conference. It's called the Munich Conference. Munich, Germany, right? So in September of 1938, it was a meeting with the leaders from France, England, and Italy. Italy, Benito Mussolini, we talked about him, right? You could see him in that picture. Sorry, I thought I did something. You can see him, he's right behind like England, Benito Mussolini. Now, Benito Mussolini is a fascist, just like Hitler, and Hitler was at the conference also. If you remember in World War I, at the end, with the League of Nations, they said instead of going to war, if something happens next time, let's all meet and talk about things diplomatically. Let's be civil about it so we don't have to start a war. So trying to move on from what they learned in World War I, this is what they were trying to do. You got all these leaders together that have very different ideas about how a government should run. You have democracy or a constitutional monarchy. In England, you have fascism, you have democracy in France. But they're trying to learn from their mistakes and not just go to war, but talk about things diplomatically. Hitler and Benito Mussolini were also like best friends. They loved each other. I read like this fun fact that the first time Hitler met Benito Mussolini that he cried because he just like loved him so much. They loved their policies. They just were like fascism rocks. They were good friends. Anyways, all these leaders together. What do we do so we don't cause a war? You're taking more land. What do we do? Czechoslovakia's leader was not permitted to attend, which is interesting because the last land or piece of land that Hitler annexed was Czechoslovakia, but they didn't invite the leader there. Why? Because the other leaders of Europe decided that Germany is allowed to annex portions of Czechoslovakia, including the Sudetenland, but then that's it. Okay, so like I said earlier, they're appeasing him. They're giving him the candy bar. He's screaming, he's crying, he's saying, no, I want a bigger military. I want to own more land. And he does it and does it and does it. And then finally they say, okay, fine, you can have it. You can break the Treaty of Versailles. That's totally fine, as long as you don't do anything else. You got your bigger military, you grew your land, just leave it at that, okay? And we won't have any issues. And that's the end of World War II. Just kidding. right? After Hitler does that, what are you going to do? What I said earlier, right? You're going to give the kid the candy bar, and then the kid's going to cry again and know if he cries again that he's going to want another candy bar. All right, so a lot of leaders were disagreeing with how things went down at the Munich conference. Some thought that appeasement was a good thing, like Neville Chamberlain, and others thought it was a bad thing. So Neville Chamberlain, he is the Prime Minister of England at the time, okay? He said, I have met with Hitler and he agrees to peace in our time. If we give him the Sudetenland, now we have peace. He believed, he may not have truly believed this, but he believed that if we appease Hitler, give him the land that he wants, excuse him from the things that he broke in the Treaty of Versailles, that it'll be done, okay? You would think that a prime minister really wouldn't be that gullible, because at the end of the day, this man wants to grow an empire. He's not just going to stop there, right? These are some women in the Sudetenlands in Czechoslovakia that's now owned by Nazi Germany, saluting Hitler. Obviously, you know, some of them look happy, some of them look sad. It's not really something they have a choice of, and they have to salute and support Hitler no matter what. And this woman could be Jewish, you don't know her fate. We'll talk about all that stuff when we get to the Holocaust, but really these next couple PowerPoints are going to be focusing more on the war. Winston Churchill, he becomes Prime Minister of England after Neville Chamberlain. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But he believed that appeasement was the worst idea. He's like, I'm not that gullible. Appeasement is like feeding a dragon, hoping he will eat you last. So you can appease him for now, but he's just going to keep going. That's the kind of man that he is, right? So Winston Churchill was a little wiser. 1939, after they appeased Hitler, they thought, okay, we gave him the land he wanted. That's the end of that. We're not going to start a war. Germany then attacks Poland, citizens bombed, ports blockaded. Germany's invasion of Poland is really what causes the war. Because these leaders, when they came together at the Munich conference, they said, you annexed all this land, you can annex the Sudetenlands, and then that's it. You can't do anything else. Germany said, haha, yeah, right. And the next thing they did was invade Poland. By them invading Poland, they went against the ruling of Britain and France. Now they're at direct war against Britain and France. Okay? War, German troops invade Poland. They went against everything that was declared at the Munich conference. Britain and France finally see, we tried to appease him for so long. He's obviously going to keep going and going and going until he tries to control all of Europe. We can't let this happen. War was the last thing that we wanted. We were so traumatized from World War I, but there's nothing left now. We can't appease him any longer. Like I said earlier, Chamberlain resigns and Churchill becomes the new British Prime Minister of England, and Germany are at war. So Chamberlain, who thought that appeasement was a great idea and he thought it was peace, as soon as Hitler invaded Poland in 1939 and war was about to happen, he was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And he left. Churchill steps in. He said, I saw this coming. I'm prepared to lead Germany. I'm prepared to lead England through this time, and I knew this was going to happen. This is just the type of man that he is. All right, so then we have FDR. He said America is isolationist and wants to avoid another deadly war. However, we must help our allies. Similar to World War I, the United States really does not want to get involved in any wars at all. They're not on the same continent of Europe. They're all the way across the sea. It's easy for them to not be involved, but because they're so powerful and we have such a big population, then European allies always want the United States to get involved. But if you go back to World War I, the United States wasn't involved until the very last year of the war. And this is kind of similar in World War II, where America really isn't involved until the very, very end, because they're traumatized from World War I. They're at a loss. They're in debt. They don't want to have to do another war. Okay, so the next thing that I want you guys to do in your guided notes is I have a couple of political cartoons for you guys to analyze. If next to them in 2 to 3 sentences, you just describe what you think that these cartoons represent, and I have a little letter that goes with each one. I'm just going to click through them, so if you want to pause the PowerPoint so you can just look at it and write your answers. This is cartoon A. This is cartoon B. And again, these are all done by the same artist. This is cartoon C. This is cartoon D. This is cartoon E. And this is cartoon F. So we talked about how the dictators rose to power. Now we just finished talking about what really started the war in Europe. The next thing, we're going to start getting into some of the battles. That'll be our next PowerPoint. The important thing to understand is there is a war going on in Europe, and then there's also another war that's going on in the Pacific, so Japan. So first we're going to talk about a lot of these battles that happened in Europe, and then we're going to talk about Japan, how they got involved, how America got involved. But it's important to understand with World War II that there are two different fronts of the war going on, okay? I have this little YouTube video here that's just a little stupid video that I thought was funny if you want to watch it. But make sure you turn in your guided notes. Good job, guys, and I'll see you in our next lecture.